There's a moment when someone's words hit you like a blade between the ribs. Not their volume, not their aggression, just their precision. The way they find exactly where you're vulnerable and press until you flinch. And in that split second, you feel something crack inside. Your composure, your certainty, your sense of control over the situation. Most people absorb that impact. They carry it for hours, replaying the moment, crafting comebacks they'll never deliver, feeling smaller with each repetition. They let emotions flood through them like water through a broken dam, drowning their judgment, their clarity, their power to respond strategically. But what if there was another way? What if you could build something impenetrable around your emotional core? Not walls that make you cold or distant, but armor so sophisticated that attacks simply bounce off without leaving a mark. Not because you don't feel, but because you've learned to control exactly what reaches you and when. This isn't about suppression. This isn't about becoming emotionless. This is about becoming emotionally untouchable through design, through strategy, through the kind of calculated self-protection that turns you from a target into something far more dangerous. Someone who cannot be shaken, cannot be manipulated, cannot be moved unless you choose to be. Because here's what nobody tells you about emotional armor. It's not built from thickness. It's built from precision. The ability to let certain things in while keeping others out. To respond when it serves you and go silent when it doesn't. To feel everything but reveal only what advances your position. You see it in the people who never seem rattled. Not because nothing affects them, but because they've mastered the art of emotional filtration. They process attacks, insults, and provocations through a system so refined that by the time it reaches their core, it's either been neutralized or transformed into something useful. They don't argue with every criticism. They don't defend against every accusation. They don't justify themselves to every challenger. Instead, they've learned something most people never will. That emotional reactions are choices, not reflexes. And the person who controls their emotional responses controls the entire interaction. Think about the last time someone tried to provoke you. Maybe they questioned your competence, mocked your decisions, or dismissed your worth. What happened inside you? Did your heart rate spike? Did your mind start racing through defenses? Did you feel that familiar surge of anger, or hurt, or indignation demanding immediate expression? That surge is where most people lose control. That moment when emotion takes the wheel and logic gets pushed to the passenger seat. When you stop calculating and start reacting. When you give away your power to whoever managed to trigger you first. But emotional armor changes everything. Because when you're properly protected, provocations don't land. They don't penetrate. They hit your defenses and either slide off harmlessly or get absorbed and redirected back at the attacker with interest. You become like water to their fire, calm where they expected chaos, still where they demanded reaction, controlled where they hoped for collapse. This isn't a natural ability. It's a developed skill. And like any skill, it can be learned, practiced, and mastered. The difference is that most people never realize they need it until they're already bleeding from wounds they could have prevented. You walk through life emotionally exposed, your triggers visible to anyone who cares to look, your weaknesses advertised through your reactions, your boundaries marked only by the places where you've been hurt before. And in a world full of people who understand power dynamics, that exposure makes you a target, not necessarily for cruelty, but for control. Because the person who can predict your emotional responses can manipulate your behavior. They know exactly what buttons to push to make you defensive, reactive, compliant, or aggressive. They can steer your decisions by managing your feelings. They can win arguments, not through logic, but through emotional destabilization. But when you develop true emotional armor, that game ends. You become unpredictable, unreadable, immune to the psychological tactics that work on everyone else. You stop being someone others can manage and start being someone they have to respect. The armor isn't built overnight. It requires understanding the anatomy of emotional manipulation, how people probe for weaknesses, how they exploit insecurities, how they use your own feelings against you, how they create emotional chaos to cloud your judgment and make you easier to control. Once you see these patterns clearly, you can defend against them, not by building walls, but by developing filters, systems that let positive emotions flow while blocking negative manipulation, techniques that preserve your ability to feel deeply while protecting your ability to think clearly. Most people think emotional strength means not caring. They mistake numbness for resilience. They build walls so thick that nothing gets through, including the good things. They protect themselves by disconnecting, by becoming cold, by shutting down their capacity for feeling altogether. That's not armor. That's amputation. True emotional armor preserves your sensitivity while protecting your stability. It lets you remain open to love, joy, connection, and inspiration, while becoming impervious to manipulation, intimidation, and psychological attack. You can feel someone's criticism without absorbing their judgment. You can hear someone's anger without taking on their emotion. You can witness someone's attempt to destabilize you without allowing them to succeed. You stay present, aware, and engaged while remaining completely protected. This level of emotional sophistication changes everything. Your relationships improve because people can't manipulate you into toxic dynamics. Your career advances because workplace politics can't destabilize your performance. Your confidence grows because external validation becomes optional rather than necessary. But perhaps most importantly, you stop living in reaction mode. Instead of bouncing from one emotional trigger to the next, constantly responding to whatever provocation someone throws your way, you start living intentionally. You choose your battles. You decide what deserves your emotional investment. You control the tempo of your own life. The people who master this skill become magnetic, not because they're emotionally unavailable, but because they're emotionally sovereign. They don't need your approval, so they can give you their authentic attention. They don't fear your judgment, so they can speak their truth. They don't depend on your validation, so they can offer you genuine support. Others sense this stability and gravitate toward it. They want to understand how someone can remain so calm under pressure, so clear in chaos, so unshakable when everything around them is turbulent. They start treating you differently, speaking to you more carefully, respecting your boundaries automatically. This isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about becoming selective, choosing what affects you and what doesn't, deciding who gets access to your emotional core and who gets kept at a safe distance, controlling the flow of energy in and out of your system like a master engineer managing a complex network. The techniques for building this armor are specific, measurable, and immediately applicable. They work in boardrooms and bedrooms, in casual conversations and heated arguments, in moments of praise and moments of attack. They transform you from someone who reacts to someone who responds, from someone who can be moved to someone who chooses when to move. Most people will never develop this level of emotional sophistication. They'll continue living at the mercy of their triggers, their moods, their reactions to other people's behavior. They'll remain vulnerable to every psychological manipulation, every emotional attack, every attempt to destabilize their peace. But you don't have to be most people. You can learn to build armor so effective that provocations become powerless, so refined that you can engage fully with life while remaining completely protected, so sophisticated that others can't even tell you're wearing it until they try to hurt you and discover their attacks simply don't land. The construction begins with understanding exactly how emotional manipulation works, why most defenses fail, and what true protection actually requires. Because once you see the game clearly, you can stop playing by other people's rules and start writing your own. The first layer of emotional armor isn't what you think. Most people try to build protection by becoming harder, colder, more defensive. They think if they can just thicken their skin enough, nothing will penetrate. But that's not armor. That's a prison. True emotional armor starts with something counterintuitive. Acceptance. Not acceptance of mistreatment or manipulation. Acceptance of the fact that people will try to destabilize you. They will probe for weakness. They will attempt to trigger reactions. They will use your emotions as weapons against you. And instead of being surprised or hurt when this happens, you expect it. You prepare for it. You neutralize it before it begins. Because here's what changes everything. The moment you stop being shocked by emotional manipulation, it loses most of its power. When someone tries to provoke you and you think, "Ah, there it is," right on schedule instead of, "How dare they?" you've already won half the battle. You're no longer reacting to the attack. You're observing it, analyzing it, deciding how much of your energy it deserves. This shift from participant to observer is the foundation of all emotional armor. You step outside the emotional exchange and watch it unfold from a position of strategic distance, not detachment. Distance. You can still feel everything. You can still care deeply. But you're no longer trapped inside the emotional storm someone else created. Most people live at the mercy of other people's emotional weather. Someone else is angry, so they become defensive. Someone else is critical, so they become insecure. Someone else is manipulative, so they become confused. Their emotional state becomes a reflection of whatever energy others project at them. They're not living their own emotional life. They're living everyone else's. But when you develop true armor, you become emotionally autonomous. Your internal state is determined by your choices, not other people's actions. Someone can throw anger at you, but you don't have to catch it. Someone can project insecurity onto you, but you don't have to absorb it. Someone can attempt to transfer their chaos to you, but you don't have to accept the delivery. The technique is simple, but requires practice. When someone says something designed to provoke you, you create a microscopic pause between their words and your response. In that pause, you ask yourself one question. Is this about me, or is this about them? 9 times out of 10, it's about them. Their insecurity, their need for control, their attempt to feel powerful by making you feel small. Once you recognize that their attack is really their confession, everything changes. You stop taking it personally because it was never personal. You were just convenient, available, an easy target for someone working through their own emotional dysfunction. And once you see it clearly, you can choose how to respond, or whether to respond at all. The second layer of armor is emotional redirection. Instead of absorbing the energy someone throws at you, you redirect it back to its source, not through retaliation or aggression, but through strategic questioning. When someone insults your intelligence, you don't defend your intelligence. You get curious about their need to question it. When someone attacks your character, you don't justify your character. You wonder aloud what prompted such an assessment. This redirection accomplishes something powerful. It puts the emotional burden back where it belongs, with the person who created it. Suddenly, they're the ones who have to explain themselves. They're the ones under examination. They're the ones who feel exposed. And you? You remain calm, curious, protected behind a shield they can't penetrate because it's made of their own reflection. The third layer is emotional aikido. Instead of meeting force with force, you use the attacker's momentum against them. When someone comes at you with anger, you respond with calm curiosity. When they approach with sarcasm, you reply with genuine interest. When they project superiority, you maintain humble confidence. The mismatch creates cognitive dissonance that neutralizes their attack and often exposes their true motivations. This isn't manipulation. It's martial arts for the mind. You're not trying to hurt anyone. You're simply refusing to engage on their chosen battlefield. You're fighting on your terms, using your weapons playing by rules they don't understand. And most of the time, they'll abandon the attack because it's not producing the reaction they wanted. But the most sophisticated layer of emotional armor is selective permeability. Like a high-tech membrane, you let certain things through while blocking others. Constructive criticism passes through because it serves your growth. Genuine concern enters because it comes from care. Honest feedback gets access because it provides value. But manipulation bounces off. Projection gets deflected. Emotional dumping gets refused at the door. This selectivity requires developing an internal screening system. Before you allow any external emotional input to affect your internal state, you run it through a series of filters. Is this coming from a place of care or a place of control? Is this designed to help me or hurt me? Is this about improving something real or just making someone else feel better? Based on the answers, you decide what gets in and what gets blocked. The people who master this skill become incredibly attractive, not because they're invulnerable, but because they're stable. Others can sense that you're not going to be thrown off balance by every emotional storm that comes your way. They can trust that you'll respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively. They know that being around you won't mean walking on eggshells or managing your emotional volatility. This stability creates a different kind of power, the power of emotional reliability. People start coming to you when they need clarity because they know you won't get caught up in the drama. They seek your perspective because they trust your judgment isn't clouded by reactive emotions. They value your presence because they know you can handle intensity without becoming intense yourself. But perhaps most importantly, you stop exhausting yourself with emotional labor that isn't yours to carry. You stop trying to manage other people's feelings. You stop absorbing their anxiety, their anger, their insecurity, their chaos. You become responsible only for your own emotional state, and that responsibility becomes a source of strength rather than a burden. The armor doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. It doesn't make you unfeeling. It makes you unfazed. It doesn't disconnect you from emotion. It gives you mastery over which emotions you engage with and how deeply you allow them to penetrate your consciousness. This mastery becomes your new default setting. When someone tries to bait you into an argument, you feel their energy hit your armor and dissipate harmlessly. When they attempt to guilt you into compliance, you recognize the manipulation before it can take root. When they project their failures onto your success, you see through the tactics so clearly it becomes almost amusing. You start moving through the world with a different kind of presence, not arrogant or dismissive, but unshakable. People sense something different about your energy. They can't quite name it, but they feel it. The way you don't flinch when they test your boundaries. The way you don't scramble to explain yourself when they question your choices. The way you remain centered when everything around you is spinning out of control. Others begin adjusting their behavior around you without being asked. They speak more carefully. They think twice before attempting to manipulate. They test your limits less frequently because they've learned those tests don't produce the results they're seeking. Your emotional armor creates a field of respect that extends beyond yourself, but the real transformation happens internally. You stop living in constant reaction mode. Instead of your day being shaped by whatever emotional grenades people throw at you, you maintain your own emotional trajectory. You feel what you choose to feel when you choose to feel it. You engage with the emotions that serve your growth and deflect the ones designed to derail your progress. The chronic exhaustion that comes from absorbing everyone else's emotional chaos begins to fade. You have more energy because you're not constantly processing feelings that don't belong to you. You sleep better because you're not replaying emotional attacks that never should have landed in the first place. You think more clearly because your judgment isn't clouded by reactive emotions. Your relationships improve dramatically, not because you care less, but because you care more strategically. You can offer genuine support without taking on someone else's problems as your own. You can listen to criticism without your self-worth being threatened. You can witness someone's pain without drowning in it alongside them. This doesn't make you selfish or uncaring. It makes you more effective at actually helping. When you're not emotionally destabilized by every crisis, you can respond with clarity and wisdom rather than just adding your own panic to an already chaotic situation. You become the calm center that others can stabilize around. The armor also protects your ambitions. How many dreams have been killed by someone else's discouragement? How many goals have been abandoned because someone convinced you they were impossible? How many paths have you avoided because someone else's fear became your own? When you're properly protected, other people's limitations can't become your limitations. Their doubts can't become your doubts. Their small thinking can't shrink your possibilities. You start making decisions based on your own judgment rather than other people's reactions. You pursue opportunities that align with your vision rather than avoiding them because someone might disapprove. You speak your truth without constantly calculating how others will respond. You live your life from the inside out instead of the outside in. The people who haven't developed this protection will sometimes find your stability threatening. They're used to being able to push emotional buttons and get predictable responses. When those buttons stop working, they might escalate their attempts. They might call you cold or accuse you of not caring. This is actually confirmation that your armor is working. Their frustration with your emotional sovereignty proves its effectiveness. But you don't need to defend your protection or explain your boundaries. The armor speaks for itself through your actions, your consistency, your unshakable presence in the face of attempts to destabilize you. You become proof that it's possible to remain fully human while being emotionally untouchable. This is how you transform from someone who gets moved by every emotional manipulation to someone who can only be moved by conscious choice. From someone who lives at the mercy of other people's moods to someone who maintains their own emotional weather regardless of the storms around them. From someone who exhausts themselves trying to manage everyone else's feelings to someone who has mastered the art of emotional self-governance. The armor isn't built overnight, but every day you practice these techniques. Every moment you choose observation over reaction. Every time you redirect manipulation back to its source, you're adding another layer of protection. Until one day you realize that the things that used to devastate you simply bounce off without leaving a mark. You've become emotionally untouchable, not because you don't feel, but because you've learned to feel selectively. Not because you don't care, but because you've mastered the art of caring strategically. Not because you've shut down, but because you've learned to filter what gets in and what gets blocked at the door. This is your emotional armor. Built not from hardness, but from wisdom. Not from walls, but from boundaries. Not from disconnection, but from the ultimate form of self-protection. The ability to remain fully engaged with life while being completely protected from those who would use your emotions as weapons against you.